everybody. Welcome. I am Patrick Bates.
And I'm Austin Downing.
And this is the first ever episode of Kinda Political, where we discuss, you guessed it, cute cat pictures.
And a little bit of politics.
Yeah, a little bit. I guess we should start with politics.
Nah, I like the idea of cat pictures, considering this is a podcast.
Good point. Okay, so picture a cat. It's a spotted cat wearing a cute little bowler hat and playing with yarn.
Oh my gosh, that is just adorable.
Okay.
All right, my turn.
Okay.
Now picture a little baby tiger, a Bengal tiger, and it's okay. Maybe we should just talk about politics. Maybe
picture a nice strapping young man at the age of 44 who was at the CNBC debate wearing a suit and stuff. I mean, everybody was wearing a suit there, but he in particular was also wearing a suit.
Are you talking about that cute kitty cat Marco Rubio?
Meow, yes.
Or were you talking about the cute kitty cat Rand Paul?
Both are pretty cute, am I right?
Or are you talking about that chubby pumpkin kitty cat Chris Christie?
Or Mike Huckabee.
I'm sorry, that was a terrible joke. Terrible joke.
Pumpkin kitty cat?
Like Garfield, like...
He's not... Garfield's not a pumpkin.
No, but, I mean, he's shaped like a pumpkin because he's a furry and fluffy and orange. And that's how pumpkins are, kind of.
They're orange. You got that part down. Okay, let's stop talking. This isn't a podcast that's called Kinda Pumpkins.
Yeah, it's kind of political.
Yeah. So let's get back to the matter at hand. There was a Republican debate, and it went about as well as we thought it would, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that the candidates displayed the perfect percentage of whininess and actual facts in their debates. Yeah,
they instead of attacking the Democrats as much as they used to, they were starting to attack the moderators, which is a bold strategy. I'm not sure how it's going to play out for them. I think the moderators might win the presidency instead.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the moderators definitely have a better chance, though you might not know that by how the crowd reacted that night.
Well, let's talk about the crowd at that debate.
Yeah, they actually only let in 1,000 people into that debate, which I think the stadium held over like 10,000. Excuse me, not stadium, but where the debate was at.
Whatever, Coliseum.
Yeah, some sort of
complex
amphitheater of.
This is now a podcast where we just list names for buildings.
Yeah.
Bank. I don't know.
Yeah, that I really cannot think of names of buildings right now.
A Capitol building. Anyway.
And back to politics.
Segues. Okay, so they only let 1,000 people in, and they I remember you were, I think, discussing how, maybe it was somebody else, was discussing how there was the Colorado Young Democrats Club tried to get in or something at the school, and they were like, nah.
Yeah. They were trying to disperse the tickets as fairly as possible, and by as fairly as possible, I mean to whoever gave them the most money. And so the students actually got I think it was 100 tickets, and then they applied for more, and it was increased from 100 to 150.
Whoa!
Yeah, big deal, man. Big deal.
Yeah, that's a percent change of 1.
I don't think you know how percentages work.
I mean, in I don't know. Yeah, it's that. I'm good at math usually,
but not when we're talking about Republicans.
No, that dumbs me down.
Horrible at math, and that rubs off on you.
Yeah. Speaking of bad at math, it seems like when I was watching that debate, I would hear a lot of things that the Republicans would say that just didn't seem to add up. For instance, they would be talking about their goals for how to fix the economy, and they would be talking about the same things in the same way that the Democrats do, but at least in my mind, they're planning for it. While they had the same end game, they don't have the right plan to go about getting that end game.
Yeah, I think that they talked about wanting to help out the middle class a lot, which is rhetoric that we always hear from the Republicans as well as the Democrats. And just like you said, it's the way that we get to helping out the middle class that actually differs there.
Yeah.
And I personally fundamentally disagree with the way that Republicans go about it.
And I do too, but I think what the larger problem at hand here is that there is this kind of thing that both parties will do where they talk in extremely broad terms. So, like, they say something that everybody can agree with. Like, yeah, I want to, like, help out the middle class. The middle class is a very large portion of America. If you go and say that you don't want to help out the middle class, that's very bad politics.
Yeah, I mean, the middle class, like, basically encompasses, like, it's hard to define what the middle class is, and a lot of America actually thinks of themselves as middle class, whether they're lower middle class or upper middle class, but a huge portion of America considers themselves middle class.
Yeah, a lot of America, this is an interesting thing, a lot of America doesn't really know where they stand, like, in that area, because, like, I believe 18% of Americans believe that they are in the upper class when we know that only 1% of America is. So there is this large, like, dichotomy in what's, like, actually true with, like, where we stand financially and where, like, and what people's perception of where they stand is financially.
Yeah, when you say 1% of America is upper class, are you just talking about the 1%, or do you mean, because, like, upper class can... it's like a very, like, relative term. It's not something that I think is defined by, like, the top 1%.
I think from, like, the sociological standpoint, I'm not sure. I'm just a middle class, like, in relation to that.
Okay.
And I think that it's like a wealth group. Like, there's, like, upper middle class, which goes up to maybe, like, $250,000 a year in income. And then I think after that, like, might be 1%. I don't really remember.
1%, I think, is anything in America is, and this is nationally. This isn't, like, it's different state by state, but it's anything over around like $500,000.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I think that's on par with what I was thinking. Anyway, so there's this kind of, like, brand of, I'm taking from a teacher that I have, of bumper sticker politics, where we get, like, these very broad terms, and, like, people on the Republican stage would say, like, something about immigration reform, and it's like, yeah, I want reforms to, like, immigration policy too, but immigration reform can mean anything from, like, trying to make access to immigrating to America a lot easier to building a fucking wall.
Right. Yeah, the differences on ideas really show up when you look at how the Republicans want to handle things versus how the Democrats want to handle things. I think that most profoundly is probably their tax plans. The Republicans typically think that flat taxes are good. I know that Cruz and Rand Paul, yeah, and they both want flat taxes, and they talked about it a little bit during the debate, and I just, like, don't see flat taxes as viable at all. And they say that it's going to help trickle down, and it's more fair and equitable, but we've seen that trickle down economics does not work since Reagan's administration. And while they seem equitable and fair superficially, once you dig down into them, it's really putting a burden that isn't necessary on the lower class.
Okay, so I have a bit of a question here. It's only a partial question.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so under Reagan, trickle-down economics, like, here's my question. So we still are under, like, the same tax code since Reagan, I believe. And does that correlate with the negative effects of trickle-down economics, that we have kept the tax code but not the cuts in spending?
Well, I mean, when you say that we're under the same tax code, I guess that means that, like, the premise is the same, but, like, we've had like the Bush tax cuts, for instance. We've had several, like, changes to how the tax code is applied. But I think that in terms of how that affects trickle-down economics, there's always been this idea that tax the rich less, and that's going to boost the economy. But we haven't really seen that in the past 30 years, perhaps during Clinton's administration, but even then, I believe that taxes were not as progressive as they are now.
I think it's interesting to hear, like, Republicans talk about not only wanting, like, a flat tax, but then also go and, like, be talking about how, because, like, they'll talk about the huge, like, massive debt that we have, and I don't really see how we can have like a flat tax rate and still like, because I don't think anybody has a plan that will cut enough in government spending to like fix the debt problem. And
unless you're talking about Rand Paul, who wants to like cut the Department of Education.
He wants to basically just get rid of government.
Yeah,
I think
IRS is done with.
Yeah,
Ted Cruz too.
I believe Rand Paul actually believes in the Articles of Confederation. Essentially, this is his platform. He's running in 1787. So the thing about trickle-down economics is, like, Rand Paul is actually going to try and like cut all this government spending, but when you even look at like Ronald Reagan, like the father of trickle-down economics, he didn't even cut spending that much. Like, he increased spending on the military, on welfare programs, and he actually had to like raise taxes on the wealthy after he originally lowered them. So like, even the guy that founded trickle-down economics didn't practice trickle-down economics because it doesn't work.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that trickle-down economics is really just a strat. You talked about how like we all want the same end game earlier, that Republicans and Democrats both want to help out the middle class. I wonder often, and maybe this is just my blatantly liberal mind speaking, but I wonder often if the Republicans really do want that for the middle class, because we haven't seen it in the past 30 years, and I don't think that we are going to see it if we continue down this road of trickle-down economics.
I think it's really hard to tell, because like, it's very easy for us to not believe the Republicans actually wanting this, but like, I think there has to be some belief within the Republican Party. Like, if you are a Republican, you believe this is actually going to work. You look at trickle-down economics, and somehow your mind has been warped, at least in my mind, because I have this great belief that trickle-down economics does not work. But somewhere along the line, like, you must believe that this is actually going to do something, because like, I don't think like Rand Paul is in like the pockets of like millionaires and stuff like that. Like, this is actually his view.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm glad that you brought up Rand Paul, because him espousing this flat tax, and same thing with Ted Cruz, like, it makes me believe that they do want some sort of fair, equitable system in place, because like I said earlier, like, superficially, it is fair. Like, why should making more money mean that you pay more in taxes? And I get that, but at the same time, like, you have to look at the state that the capitalistic system is in right now. And right now we're seeing increasing wealth inequality, increasing income inequality, and all of this happens because we don't have a progressive enough tax system, because we let rich people get out of paying certain taxes simply because they can afford tax attorneys that are able to dig through the IRS code and find the loopholes that are in there. And I think that if we really want to change that, then we have to like do what the Democrats want.
So people like Rand Paul like want like less government intervention. They want more like states' rights. And why I have such like a problem with that is like what we've seen in North Carolina, where states won't will enact regressive taxes. Like, there is a tax in North Carolina right now that just got passed recently, where we will tax people for having work on their cars, which will mostly affect poor people instead of like wealthy people. Where we should have progressive taxes, we're doing regressive taxes, and that is a major problem, because that is going to cause income inequality to grow even more.
Right. I feel like the Republicans in North Carolina especially have no interest in being fair at all. Whereas these national Republicans that are running for president might have some interest, but the ones here in North Carolina are really fucking some shit up lately.
Yeah, like, I understand, like, Republicans that might have good intentions behind it, like wanting to give states more rights, because states like differ in opinions on things. But that's also a major problem, because some state might have an opinion that is very harmful to like large bodies of America.
Yeah, I kind of disagree. I think that having state rights is okay. I think that giving more rights to the states is okay, because I think that local government and state government is where it's at. I mean, that's where we have the stuff that affects most of our day-to-day life. And so this sounds so Republican of me, but if the or libertarian, however you want to describe it, but if you give if you're taking what the federal government says and applying it to the whole country, I think that some people in some states might not like certain things versus other people in other states, and I think that that's why the approach that we've taken to like medical marijuana, for instance, and then to the legalization of marijuana have been good steps in giving states back their rights.
I'm not saying like everything should be a decision made by the federal government. I'm just saying a lot of things, because like you will hear Rand Paul basically say about everything, yeah, let's let the states decide that. And I don't think that's the right way to go about anything.
I mean, yeah, I think that like the federal government should have say in certain things, like I don't know, like transportation. I think education. Even I'd like to have a uniform education system throughout the United States. I don't want some teacher in Texas preaching about creationism or something. I don't know.
Austin, are you saying that you're a supporter of the Common Core?
I don't adamantly agree with it, but I mean, I think the Common Core has its merits and has its drawbacks. And I mean, we had just as uniform of an education system under the No Child Left Behind policy that Bush had, and I mean, granted, that was terrible policy, yeah. but I mean, as long as we have some sort of uniform structure in place, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think that's a good point to end on with this discussion. And now what I want to talk about is the Democratic debate that occurred several weeks ago. I can't remember the exact time. Time is an illusion. And there was, so there was a lot less for me to like hate in the Democratic debate because I am a Democrat. But there were still some comments that were made that were a little bit iffy in my book.
Such as?
Okay, so really the one that I want to talk about is not one that I have as big of a problem with, like Jim Webb saying that he thinks affirmative action is racist, or basically anything Jim Webb said on stage. I killed a guy in Vietnam, Jim Webb 2016. What I want to talk about is a comment that Bernie Sanders made.
Oh, Lord.
And
I know what comment you're talking about now.
Okay. I just want to talk about this because I think it was not necessarily... Like, I understand where Bernie... Hold on. Let me say the comment first. Bernie Sanders had said in response to something that Hillary Clinton had said, what Bernie Sanders said was that he was like, okay, it was in relation to gun control, and he said that all the shouting in the world will not do anything about gun control. But he said it directly in response to something that Hillary Clinton had said. So what it sounded to me like was that Bernie Sanders was like, whoa, a woman's speaking, calm down, let the man speak and explain to you what gun control problems are.
I completely understand how that comment came across, but the thing is that you didn't say anything during the debate. No, when we were watching it, and then everybody else that we were with didn't wince an eye when he made that comment. It seems like these accusations were construed after the debate. In fact, I read an article where she had talked about it the day after the debate, but she didn't make a reference to it being sexist at all, or she didn't make a reference to his words of shouting being directed towards the idea that like women, whenever they talk about politics, are shouting. But I think that in this case, specifically, Bernie Sanders was just talking about how each side of the argument shouts about what they think is right, and that we're not finding a common ground here, and that we should be finding a common ground, which is what Bernie Sanders' record on gun control has been, is sensible gun control, and that is the common ground.
Okay, but the thing with me... Okay, so Bernie Sanders set himself up in a bad position when he said that, is really the main problem that I have. with what he said. And also, I think we have a bit of a disagreement on how I reacted and how the rest of the room reacted when he said that. Because I swear I made some reaction to that just because it was very poor phrasing in my book. But the thing, I think that's the major problem, is he used some very poor phrasing, and now Hillary Clinton can use that in her campaign as something to hark on. Just be like, Bernie Sanders is a sexist. Listen to what he thinks whenever he hears a woman talking. He hears shouting. And I think that's... Because now Bernie Sanders' record shows that he stands up for women's rights. So, which doesn't necessarily mean you can't be sexist, but his policies aren't sexist, and that's what's important. And so now we're not talking about Bernie Sanders' policy, or at least Hillary Clinton is trying to make it so that we're not talking about Bernie Sanders' policy. And that might actually have an effect on the rest of his campaign.
But before Bernie Sanders made this comment, he wasn't thinking, I wonder if this would be misconstrued as sexist. Because what he was saying was not related to sexism at all. It was related to the matter at hand, which was gun control.
I think there might be some sexist undertones to what he had said because of the way that he said it. It might have been, because all the shouting in the world directly in response to a woman does correlate with some societal conversational patterns between men and women, where men ignore women and just assume that anything that they're saying is shouting if they're really passionate about something and stuff like that. And I think that is part of a message that he accidentally put across when he spoke.
I realize that there are those certain instances where we see, especially in politics, where we see women being put down, but that's not at all what Sanders was doing here. And I know that you disagree, but I think that it's pointless to even bring this up anymore, because I think that if you look at his record, like you admitted, and if you look at how he's treated women in politics since the beginning of his career, and if you look at how he's approached these certain situations, you can tell that. And I get it. I'm playing the... Well, he doesn't seem like the kind of person that would do that card, and we should never do that. But at the same time, we have to remember that this is a political game that we're playing right now, and we lie in politics often. And I think that this was an opportunity for Hillary Clinton, and she took the opportunity. And I don't think that because she took that opportunity in this political game that makes it correct or accurate in any way.
Yeah, I don't disagree that this is basically a pointless discussion to be having because it's not related to the issues, but I think it might be a pointless discussion that will be had, not by us, but by the candidates. And I think that's what I'm trying to say is the major problem with what Bernie had said.
Oh, yeah.
Is that it is something that can shift this discussion away from actual issues.
But that were never his intentions, though.
Well, also another thing is it's pointless to try to... we can't say what his intentions were. We're not Bernie Sanders.
Well, I can say that his intentions weren't to be sexist, because
why would he... Well, I mean, I don't think his intentions were to be sexist, but his intention may have been, in his mind, oh, she's shouting. It could... No, I know I'm, walking on very thin ice here. And my argument doesn't have that much of a basis, but it does have a basis in societal conversational patterns where men will do this to women. So all I'm saying is that is a possibility that could be at play, and Hillary has a point when she's bringing that up, but it's not the best point to be making when you're in a political campaign.
Okay. I agree. I think that this society that we live in does often allow for those kinds of comments, and I think that maybe Bernie Sanders did, in fact, use some consciously racist or sexist. Yeah, we're not talking about racism.
But we could talk about racist rhetoric because that is, I think we've seen a little bit of that with Democratic candidates. Not racist rhetoric, but just a refusal to say the phrase Black Lives Matter earlier on in their campaigns, because both O'Malley and Clinton for sure used the phrase All Lives Matter. And when Bernie Sanders was discussing Black Lives Matter, he would say Black Lives Matter, but immediately proceed it with like Hispanic Lives Matter, Asian Lives Matter, White Lives Matter. Maybe not White Lives Matter.
Yeah, it seems like he learned his lesson during the debate when he clearly stated Black Lives Matter.
I think all candidates learned the lesson during the debate.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that they're pandering to a more liberal audience because that's what happens in the primaries. And so they all made this or said this in hopes that liberals would latch on to that. And I think, like I was saying earlier, that it's just part of the political game. Again, like Bernie Sanders comment that Black Lives Matter, I'm convinced is purely political. I don't think. I mean, I know he believes that and that his policies exemplify that belief that Black Lives Matter. But at the same time, him saying that during the debate doesn't prove anything more than he realized that that was the right thing to say at that time.
Yeah, it's not like Bernie Sanders is going to like join in on any Black Lives Matter protests or anything.
I don't know. I mean, he could. He's been an activist for a long time, and a civil rights activist at that. I think that. I mean, how it depends on how you classify Black Lives Matter, because he, marched with Martin Luther King back in the '60s, and I think that while that does not mean as much as it would today. I think that at the same time, it shows where he's at in his views.
Yeah, that's definitely accurate. I want to move on now to discuss the SNL skit that was about the Democratic debate as like the last thing that we talk about before we end this podcast. And there was a lot of good there in that.
I thought it was a
horrible
horrible skit, to be honest.
Really? I mean, it went on a little long, and by a little long, I mean very long. Just like almost any SNL skit.
Yeah, well, I think it wasn't even that. It was just that, like, in portraying... I felt like the only character that they accurately portrayed was Hillary Clinton in some sense. Because I think that in the SNL skit, she had a certain nonchalance about her that I think she had during the debate, and I think that was appropriate during the debate too, because we wanted to see her as a regular person then, and she was, and that wasn't something that we had seen before.
Yeah, I think Larry David's portrayal of Bernie Sanders was a fairly accurate portrayal.
Not
I mean,
at
no,
all.
hold on. It was obviously a little bit of like George Costanza. It was a little bit like Seinfeld there. But, I mean, okay, if you're going to do a skit with Bernie Sanders literally only talks about the issues whenever like he's campaigning. There's no room for comedy there. So what they did was they had like him start off saying like, we're doomed, and like they can't list specific issues because there's no comedy in that. So they just like did Seinfeld jokes basically.
Yeah, no, I get that, but at the same time, the only thing that they really made funny about Bernie Sanders was the fact that he was old and he complained a lot about things, as the common perception of old people often is, and his accent. And I think that if that's the only two things that you have to make fun about a person, then he must be doing a pretty damn good job in his politics.
I mean, I don't think those are the only things they could make fun of about Bernie Sanders. I'm sure. I think it's
his dance skills, maybe. Those are pretty horrible.
Yeah. I think it might just be lazy writing on the behalf of SNL, which is not a uncommon accusation that we'll hear just because they only have like a week to like write stuff.
But it's their job. I'm
Yeah.
just kidding. I don't know. One thing that did upset me about the skit in particular, I don't really care about the Bernie Sanders thing. I think that they did a really good job with Jim Webb, and Lincoln Chafee just came off as like this cartoon character.
It was
I don't know.
terrible impersonation of Lincoln Chafee, but whatever. I was really bothered by the they shafted Martin O'Malley.
Yeah. I mean, but then again, I think the same criticism with Martin O'Malley, or the same criticism with Bernie Sanders applies to Martin O'Malley here, simply because Martin O'Malley hit a lot of issues during the debate and did a really good job of talking about them, and it's hard to make comedy out of that.
Yeah, like it was so weird to me because like I was watching the SNL skit and then like they like cut to O'Malley and then they were like he was like, oh, there's a question for me? Like that didn't happen during the debate. Like Martin O'Malley got got in there a good bit on the questions, I thought.
Yeah.
And did a good job when he answered it, and then, like, they just acted like, yeah, you don't exist.
Yeah, I mean, he had maybe, 3 or 4 lines during the whole skit.
Yeah, and all of them were, his, closing statement was, the most, it was just, saying, he was on the stage or something, and then that was it.
Yeah.
He was like, yeah, you can cut away now.
When, in reality, he had the most beautiful closing statement out of all the candidates.
Yeah, he had the, by far and away, best closing statement. And, I think part of it is O'Malley just doesn't have the support in the polls, but that's not fair. Just, I think it's just, the media is perpetuating Martin O'Malley cannot win the election.
Well, that's what the media does with a lot of candidates, and people always complain about how the media has so much influence over that, and it's true that they do, but at the same time, it is what it is, and I think people should just take more time to be informed themselves and try to figure things out and do their due diligence. And
SNL does not do the best job of representing the candidates, and now Donald Trump is going to host SNL, I believe, and maybe that already happened. I'm not really.
Patrick, we're not going to talk about.
I know
Donald
we're
Trump.
not going to talk about Donald Trump. I'm just saying, that's how bad SNL is with talking about the political spheres. They'll let Donald Trump host, and since I talked about Donald Trump and said a no word, I think that's where we should wrap up.
I agree.
For the first episode, I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, keep listening. I'm Patrick Bates.
And I'm Austin Downing.
And we'll see you on the flip side.
Pick it up and throw it all around. Don't let that bullshit